So what I'd like to hear from Alexander is, you mentioned that one of the resolutions to the Winter War was that Finland was not really supposed to cooperate with Germany in any shape or form. What was the Finnish role in World War II, and specifically when it comes to your area of specialization, which is the siege of Leningrad? And maybe if you can talk about Mannerheim in that context, if applicable, that would be very helpful for our audience.
Well, Finland, naturally, they pledged not to cooperate, but that's exactly what they did in 1940. And when the plan for the Barbarossa offensive was finally approved by Hitler in December 1940, Finland was mentioned as one of the countries that would take part in the war. So there was a certain amount of Finnish propaganda which said that they joined the war at the very last moments, and nothing was decided. But if Hitler mentions Finnish participation in the war of half a year before it's actually started, so maybe it does mean something. Anyway, the Finns started actively exchanging intelligence with the Germans. They started coordinating their plans, and the way the war started is that on the 22nd of June, the Germans used Finnish bases, air bases, and naval bases. They used Finnish submarines, planted mines at the fairways of near the coast of the Baltic Sea, right next to the Soviet territory. And the Finns still remained kind of inactive for about 3 days. They did not immediately declare war on the Soviet Union, but on the 25th of June, the Soviet Union decided to bomb the airfields that the Germans used on the Finnish territory, and they know all known locations of German bases. Naturally, a lot of bombs fell far away from their destinations, and there were tiny casualties. I think almost no one got really killed, but the Finns used this as a casus belli for declaring the war on the Soviet Union. And surprisingly enough, the entire army was already mobilized and ready to start their offensive on day one, but the Finns still did not rush into action immediately. There was some border skirmishes, but nothing of note until the 9th of July. So the Finns, that's what I think. The Finns decided to wait until the Germans would advance deep into the Soviet territory, and they would see they would wanted to see whether the whole German invasion plan was going well. And by the 9th of July, the situation looked perfect for the Germans. They were just some of the German high commanders even noted in diaries or exchanges that the war is as good as won, literally. And that's when the Finns decided to make their move in order to snatch their piece of the big pie that was the Soviet Union, and started their offensive in Karelia. The way it made the whole situation worse, the situation was already bad for the Soviet Union, as it started at the high command of the military command of the Northern Front, which was the front which defended Leningrad. It stretched from the coast of the Arctic Ocean all the way to the Baltic states. The high command started dragging the military units that were located on the Finnish border to the area around Pskov, or Estonia, that was still free from the Germans at the time. So basically, the border, by the time the Finns attacked, the border it's not like it was denuded of Soviet troops, but a lot of troops were moved to fight against the Germans. So it made things much easier for the Finns. And the Soviet High Command still had to drag units from the Finnish border in order to stop the much more dangerous and massive German invasion. So the Finns had a rather easy time reaching the coast of the Ladoga Lake on the Karelian Isthmus. And by the end of August, when the situation was getting catastrophic around Leningrad and the German troops broke through the last major defensive line on their way to Leningrad, the Luga line. And the Finns made their move around Vyborg, and this is when the so-called Vyborg catastrophe happened, as it was described in the Soviet war history as 3 divisions were trapped around Viborg. Some of their men could be evacuated, but the Finns took a lot of prisoners, and even the divisions that got evacuated had to abandon their heavy equipment. So this was like the local Soviet Dunkirk on a minor scale. And the Finns advanced all the way to, speaking of the Karelian Isthmus, they advanced all the way to Leningrad, and the Finnish troops basically formed the northern parts of the encirclements. They maintained the northern parts. They stopped right next to the Soviet line of fortifications. It was a massive line of bunkers built in the early 1930s as a line of defense against not so much Finland, because Finland was not seen as a major military threat. The main danger coming from Finland was that it was seen as a country eager to offer its territory to imperialist powers, and basically this is where the invasion of Britain, France, any other major imperialist power could have come from. I mean, as it was seen in the early 1930s before Hitler's rise to power. And that's when the Soviet Union built most of these bunkers, and the Finns stopped right next to them. So they did not want to advance that much further for a number of reasons. First of all, they did not have heavy siege artillery to pulverize these bunkers into dust, and that was basically an essential thing before trying to assault Leningrad itself. They did not want, literally, to pull chestnuts out of the fire for the Germans, because the city, according to the Finnish-German agreements, according to the arrangements they made before the war, Leningrad was supposed to become German territory, and they did not want to assault this massive city that was full of barricades, bunkers, bricked-in windows with firing slits, and lots of men ready to defend the city to the last breath. They did not want to do that because the Germans had to. It was the German job to capture the town, and then the Finns would just quietly advance to this already dead city and occupy the territory along the Neva River. So the border between the Nazi Reich and Finland was supposed to pass along the Neva River. And there's a huge misconception, which I encounter every now and then in Western history of the war, and not just the Western history, but some Russians are even prone to falling for this. It's the completely false claim that Finland only advanced to its own borders. Well, this is complete bullshit. Even if you look at the map of the Karelian Isthmus, where the Finns did not seize a lot of territory, they advanced 10, 20 kilometers further into the Soviet territory. But actually, in eastern Karelia, the Finns seized a huge part of territory which had never belonged to Finland before that. Finland or Sweden, even. So they captured the town of Petrozavodsk, which is a Russian town on the coast of the Onega Lake. That's the lake to the east of Ladoga. And the way they occupied this area was kind of similar to what the Nazis did. They established a number of prison camps for ethnic Russians. So there was a very clear segregated approach to the local population. They decided that the Russians, ethnic Russians, were politically unreliable, and they were basically put in prison camps. These camps were not like the Nazi death camps, where people would be sent to exterminate them in gas chambers or slaughtered en masse. But the conditions the Russians were kept in were completely horrendous. So they could be in a way compared to what American prisoners of war experienced in Japanese POW camps, because they were completely malnourished. Quite often they were beaten for any kind of misdemeanor, as it would be considered by the Finnish guards. You didn't bow to them, you didn't look the right way, you would get beaten. It's interesting that they had a very kind of Machiavellian policy on allowing the inmates of these camps to go outside. This was made to maintain the pretense that these camps were not that bad, but at the same time, prisoners could be executed for fleeing the camps, and it was up to the local guard to decide whether the person was just leaving this barbed wire camp to go into the woods to pick berries, or whether this person was fleeing. So there were a lot of arbitrary shootings. It was it sounds really weird, but that's the way it was. The number of civilians who died in these camps is estimated to be from 4 to 10,000. So no proper records were kept, but this is the rough estimate. The number of ethnic Russians that passed through these camps was approximately, in different time periods, it was, if you take all the people who were like put in camps, this is about 40,000, but in the initial phase of the war, in the first year of the war, it was way less, and the greatest mortality rate was in the first winter of the war, 1941, 1942. The death rates of the inmates of these camps was actually similar to the death rates of civilians in besieged Leningrad. So the Finns claim that they had no food for themselves, but it's not like I've heard of any massive cases of starvation in Finland itself. So basically, the Finns still had enough food for their civilians. And well, it's a kind of, I would say, like it's a case of maliciously criminal negligence like this. So that's the way I can describe it, because the Finns, okay, they did not have a lot of food, but they did not want to kind of walk not an extra mile, but make an extra little step to feed the innocent civilians who were kept in these camps. The situation with the Russian prisoners of war was even worse because they were kept under much worse conditions, and their mortality rate was it was lower than the mortality rate of the Soviet prisoners of war in Nazi captivity, but it was about something like about 30% of them died in Finnish prison camps. So which is a huge number considering, and this kind of undermines the claim that Finland was like a completely like democratic, and when we say democratic, it means humanitarian state, which conforms with all the international regulations on maintaining the prisoners of war and on keeping up the standards. And it's interesting that in 1942, a Swiss doctor like Hugo Petermann wrote an article, and he wrote a number of articles, and he basically started a massive awareness campaign about the poor situation of Soviet prisoners of war. It actually reached the ears of Americans, who made a kind of a reprimand to Sweden, and to Finland. And it's interesting that while England declared war on Finland, America did not. It's another kind of curious bits in this war, although they were allies with the Soviet Union. So that's another thing is that the Finns renamed the town of Petrozavodsk to Anis Linna. Anis is the name of the Onega Lake in Finland, and Linna is fortress. So basically, the Onega fortress. They started renaming the towns, which naturally meant that they kind of wanted this territory to become part of the Greater Finland. Although later they tried to deny this claim because formally the Finnish parliament did not sign the instruments of annexation, of this region to Greater Finland, but actually de facto it was being annexed because the children who studied at the schools on the occupied territories were taught about the ideas of Greater Finland. The children who were like ethnic Karelians, or the few Russians who were seen to be politically reliable, the tiny number of them. Even the Nazis had there a number of Russians who turned codes or who offered their services to them, and they were used as useful idiots to kind of advance their agenda. But generally, the Karelian kids, as the kinship folk, for the Finns. They were taught about they were raised as future citizens of the Greater Finland, like this. Well, this is speaking of the occupation.